Why women always run back to the man who stayed silent, psychology tricks. The blow-up was ugly. Words flew fast, sharp, and careless, aimed at the softest parts of both of them. It felt like the kind of argument that doesn't just end a chapter, but burns the whole book. And then she said it. "I'm done. We're over." She braced herself for the usual ending, begging, bargaining, a tidal wave of emotion. Maybe a late-night confession or a string of dramatic messages, but instead, she met something far more unsettling. Silence. No calls, no texts, no angry posts. He didn't chase, didn't explain, didn't try to rewrite the moment. He simply stepped back and vanished into stillness. At first, she swore it was a relief. This is what she wanted, wasn't it? But as hours fade into days and days into a week, that silence stops feeling like space and starts feeling like absence. What once felt freeing now feels like a question mark hanging in the room. And quietly, almost reluctantly, another thought creeps in. Did I just push away the one man who refused to lose himself trying to keep me? This scenario isn't rare. It's a psychological pattern that repeats itself in countless relationships. The video's title uses the word always. And while nothing in human emotion is ever absolute, the tendency is predictable enough to feel universal. A man's silence can create a powerful gravitational pull, forcing a woman to confront the reality of the breakup in a way arguments never could. Today, we're not just talking about the no contact rule like it's some dating trick. We're diving into the deeper psychology behind it, the fear of loss, the need for closure, and the way silence forces reflection more effectively than any speech ever could. But there's an important distinction. Dignified silence rooted in self-respect is very different from toxic silence used as punishment or manipulation. One creates clarity, the other creates confusion. This isn't about playing games to win someone back. It's about understanding the emotional forces at work so you can face love, conflict, and heartbreak with a clearer mind and stronger sense of self. 1. Loss aversion and the psychological void. To understand why a woman so often finds herself drifting back toward the man who chooses silence over chaos, you must first understand the mind's absolute terror of losing something it once believed was secure. Because loss aversion isn't just some clever psychology term, it's the built-in security system of the human brain, screaming twice as loudly when something is taken away as it whispers when something is gained. And that's why losing a $20 bill can ruin your morning, while finding one barely moves the emotional needle. It's irrational, yes, but that's exactly why it runs the show. When a relationship ends with shouting, long arguments, circular debates, dramatic tension, and emotional fireworks, the truth no one likes to admit is this: the connection is technically still alive. That drama is electricity. That back and forth is still contact. That noise is still a tie between two people, even if the tie is fraying or toxic or painful. But when a man goes absolutely silent, no warnings, no emotional monologues, no desperate attempts to prove his worth, he does something far more powerful than ending a conversation. He removes his presence from her emotional reality. The good morning texts vanish. The inside jokes evaporate. The comforting predictability of his masculine energy disappears. The man who once felt so close, so reachable, so eager to connect suddenly becomes a blank space she can't decode. Don't underestimate that shift. Don't pretend it's small. That is a psychological void, a sudden vacuum where something warm and familiar used to live. And the human mind, especially the emotional mind, hates vacuums. Her brain doesn't simply register his silence as he's busy or maybe he's moved on. No. Her brain registers it as a sharp, immediate loss of safety, identity, connection, and imagined future. It feels like the ground dropping out from under her feet. This isn't logic. Logic doesn't even get invited into this part of the conversation. This is primal. This is instinct. This is the panic button of loss aversion being slammed with full force, and once that button is triggered, every emotion becomes heightened, intensified, magnified. She doesn't just feel his silence, she feels the absence of validation she once relied on. She feels the absence of emotional attention she once had access to. She feels the absence of a man who, even if imperfect, made her feel wanted in a world where many men don't. That emptiness is loud. And then Just when her mind is swirling, the second psychological force hits her: scarcity. Human beings crave what slips out of reach. It's ancient psychology. When something is abundant, predictable, overly accessible, or constantly available, the emotional value we assign to it slowly shrinks. But the moment it becomes limited, uncertain, or out of reach, our brains immediately inflate its worth. When he was always texting back immediately, always offering reassurance, always explaining himself, always trying to keep the peace, always proving he cared, his attention, though kind, became too predictable. And predictable things rarely excite us. But when that same man steps back, holds his position, and disappears into silence with the quiet confidence of a high-value man who isn't begging for approval, something shifts. Suddenly his attention becomes a rare resource. Suddenly his presence becomes something she cannot summon. Suddenly his masculine energy feels different, not because it changed, but because she no longer has access to it on demand. That is the scarcity effect, the transformation of something familiar into something valuable. And ironically, it's his silence, not his effort, that triggers the shift. He's not sending roses. He's not writing late-night paragraphs trying to win her back. He's not pleading or performing or convincing. He's not playing savior or martyr. He's simply absent. And that absence becomes a message of its own. I am not desperate. I am not waiting to be chosen. My attention is something you earn, not something you own. Don't underestimate how deeply that message hits. Don't assume she shrugs it off. A high-value man doesn't need noise to make an impact. His silence is enough to rearrange the emotional landscape. And when he holds that silence, not with bitterness, not with games, but with grounded masculine energy, it forces her to see everything without the cushioning of his presence. She has to face the reality of what she walked away from. She has to feel the weight of his absence. She has to replay moments she once dismissed, because the mind hates an emotional vacuum and will try to fill it with memory, imagination, or longing. She begins to wonder if she misjudged him. She begins to question whether she undervalued him. She begins to feel the contrast between what he offered and what she's experiencing now. That is the power of silence. It turns certainty into doubt. It turns confidence into curiosity. It turns dismissal into desire. And here's the part most men never realize. Silence is not passive. Silence is active. Silence is a statement. Silence is a recalibration of value. You must understand that the man who walks away quietly, without tantrums, without threats, without theatrics, becomes the man who stands out from the crowd. He becomes the man who operates from self-respect rather than insecurity. He becomes the man who doesn't chase, but still manages to attract women because he isn't bending himself out of shape to be chosen. That calm, grounded quiet communicates more than any speech. Don't be afraid of that silence. Don't break it out of fear. Hold it with the strength of someone who understands his worth. Because in that quiet space, the woman who once felt certain suddenly becomes unsure, and the man she once figured out becomes the man she can't stop thinking about. Silence is the doorway through which a woman often returns, not because he manipulated her, but because she finally recognizes the value she overlooked, the attention she assumed would always be there, and the masculine energy she didn't know she'd miss this much. That is why she comes back, not to the noise, not to the drama, but to the man who stayed silent. 2. The need for closure, Zeigarnik effect, and cognitive dissonance. The human mind is wired for endings, and when there is no ending, the brain refuses to rest. And this is exactly why a woman so often runs back to the man who stayed silent, because silence becomes an unfinished chapter, an unresolved story that her mind cannot let go of, and the Zeigarnik effect turns that open loop into a psychological echo that refuses to fade. And as the Old Stoic wisdom teaches, he who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior. A reminder from Confucius that the strongest power is the power to hold steady, to not flinch, to stay composed. When you remain silent after a breakup, you create a void her mind must fill, and because the brain hates incompletion, it forces her to replay the story again and again, searching for meaning, searching for closure, searching for an answer that only you can provide but refuse to give, and this very refusal becomes the hook, the magnet, the pull she cannot escape, because in modern life filled with constant noise, a man who chooses silence stands out like a mountain unmoved, strong, disciplined, and centered, the embodiment of Stoicism win, and she feels that contrast deep in her psychology. Don't underestimate this. Don't doubt this. You must understand that her thoughts become tangled in the unfinished narrative, and cognitive dissonance starts tearing at her inner world because she is holding two conflicting truths at the same time. I ended this for good reasons, and I can't stop thinking about him, and those beliefs cannot coexist without pain, without friction, without the mental pressure that demands relief, and most people will do anything, anything at all, to end emotional discomfort, and as Aristotle once said, nature abhors a vacuum, and your silence creates that vacuum, a psychological empty space that she desperately tries to fill with explanations, fantasies, rewrites, and emotional revisions of the past. She begins rewriting history not because the past suddenly changed, but because it is easier to adjust her beliefs than to sit with the torment of not knowing. And this is where your iron mind becomes your greatest advantage, because the man who remains silent, composed, unfazed, and unbothered exerts a pressure far stronger than any argument and far more persuasive than any emotional plea, because he refuses to feed the conflict and refuses to validate her narrative. Instead, he lets her mind battle itself, and that battle always pulls her back, always, because the need for psychological congruence is one of the strongest forces in human behavior. Don't chase, don't explain, don't try to fix her dissonance for her. Let her confront it. Let her feel it. Let her resolve it the only way she can, by reaching out, by rewriting belief A, by convincing herself that maybe she made a mistake. Maybe the fight wasn't that bad. Maybe you were more patient, stronger, calmer than she realized. Maybe you were the one with old Stoic wisdom guiding your behavior all along. And this is the secret many men never learn. You don't win by force, you win by presence. You don't win by pressure, you win by absence. You don't win by talking, you win by not needing to talk. That is power. That is discipline. That is Stoicism win in action. In modern life, where men are constantly told to react, to explain, to justify themselves, silence becomes rebellion, silence becomes strategy, silence becomes mastery of emotion, and mastery of emotion is mastery of outcomes. You must cultivate an iron mind that refuses to collapse under emotional chaos, because women feel that strength on a primal level and they are drawn to it, often against their own logic. Let's be clear, your silence didn't prove she was wrong. It created the environment where she had to convince herself that she acted too quickly, felt too strongly, reacted too emotionally. And this self-generated realization is far more powerful than anything you could ever tell her, because people believe what they tell themselves, not what others tell them. Don't break the silence. Don't destroy this psychological leverage. Stand firm. Stand quiet. Stand disciplined. As Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, and in this case, the best strategy is to be unlike the man she expects, calm instead of reactive, patient instead of needy, unshaken instead of desperate. That is how you win. That is how you lead. That is how you master your life. And when you master yourself, everything else follows, because old Stoic wisdom never dies. It only becomes more relevant in a world full of noise, distraction, and emotional instability. Hold your silence. Hold your center. Hold your iron mind. That is how men win. That is how Stoicism wins. That is how you reclaim control, respect, and power. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button, leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs clarity. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep psychological insights. Positive affirmation. Based on the paragraph you provided, I stay grounded and confident, even in silence. Ask your audience to comment it. Comment to remember, I stay grounded and confident, even in silence. 3. Misinterpreting silence as strength. In a world that rewards the loudest voice, the longest text thread, and the most dramatic gesture, Silence can look like a superpower, but only if you understand what kind of silence you're dealing with. After a breakup, everyone expects the script: chasing, late night voicemails, emotional confessions, begging for another chance. When you don't do that, when you step back instead of chasing, your silence can look like ironclad self control. It breaks the pattern she's used to. That is why, to many women, the quiet man suddenly seems like a high value man. He looks like the guy who is grounded, calm, and not ruled by his emotions. He looks like he respects himself too much to plead, too focused on his own life, purpose, and masculine energy to collapse just because a relationship ended. Your silence sends a very clear message: my life continues with or without you. My peace is my priority. And don't underestimate how powerful that is. For a woman who is used to men blowing up her phone, arguing, explaining, and chasing, your calm distance is confusing in the best way. It feels like a challenge. It makes her wonder, did I misjudge him? Did I underestimate him? Did I just walk away from a truly high value man? That quiet, composed presence can absolutely attract women because it suggests that you have options, standards, and emotional discipline, and whether she admits it or not, that is deeply compelling. But you must be brutally honest with yourself here, because not all silence is noble, and not every quiet man is walking in healthy masculine energy. There is a world of difference between dignified silence and the poisonous tactic known as the silent treatment. One is about protecting your sanity. The other is about controlling hers. Don't confuse them. A man who takes space after a clear breakup, who steps away from drama so he can heal, reflect, and rebuild, is acting from strength. He's not trying to make her suffer. He's trying to take care of himself. That is the posture of a genuine high-value man. He doesn't scream, he doesn't beg, he doesn't chase. He simply exits the chaos and refocuses on his mission. His silence is not a trap. It's a boundary. That kind of silence might attract women naturally because they sense he's not emotionally dependent on anyone's approval. Be that man. Be the man whose quiet is rooted in self-respect, not a strategy to make someone panic. Don't ghost to get revenge. Don't withhold affection just to watch her squirm, and don't pretend emotional neglect is strength. When silence becomes a weapon, you're not being powerful, you're being cruel. The silent treatment is a different beast altogether. It isn't about taking time to cool down or letting emotion settle. It's a calculated move. It's punishment dressed up as space. It's when a man shuts down, blocks communication, and watches his partner spin in anxiety, wondering what she did wrong and how to fix it. That is not the vibe of a high-value man. That is the behavior of someone who uses emotional starvation as leverage. Don't do that. You must understand, real masculine energy doesn't need to torture anyone to feel in control. The silent treatment makes her feel invisible, nervous, and desperate for a crumb of attention. In that twisted dynamic, the reason she keeps coming back is not because you attract women in a healthy way, but because she's locked in a cycle of fear, guilt, and emotional confusion. That isn't love. That's trauma bonding. And if you rely on that kind of manipulation, you're not leading. You're breaking someone down. So how do you tell the difference, really? Look at the context and the intention. A dignified silence is something you choose for yourself after the relationship has clearly ended or after boundaries have been crossed too many times. You stop reaching out not to hurt her, but to stop hurting yourself. You go to the gym, you build your career, you reconnect with friends, you reclaim your masculine energy by pouring it into your own life. You're not sitting by the phone, timing your responses, plotting how to make her jealous. You're busy living. That is how a high-value man moves, quietly, steadily, without drama. This version of silence can actually attract women over the long term because it shows that you can stand on your own 2 feet, emotionally and practically. On the other hand, manipulative silence usually shows up as a pattern: argument, explosion, and then ice. Days of ignoring her, refusing to respond. Watching her melt down, then letting her crawl back apologizing for things that weren't even her fault. You must see that pattern for what it is: not strength, not boundaries, but emotional abuse wrapped in silence. Don't romanticize manipulation. Don't call abuse being strong. Don't tell yourself you're just staying mysterious, when in reality you're punishing someone for having feelings. If you're using silence to control her behavior, that's not you acting as a high value man, that's you exposing your own insecurity. Be better than that. Be the man who can say, "This isn't healthy for me," and walk away without theatrics. Be the man whose masculine energy is steady, not explosive or cold. A man who understands that the right way to attract women isn't through fear, confusion, or emotional whiplash, but through stability, clarity, and genuine self respect. The truth is, women often do feel an intense pull back toward the man who stayed quiet, but that pull can come from two very different places. It can come from admiration for a man who handled the breakup with grace and calm, or it can come from the deep, painful hook of emotional manipulation. You must ask, is her pull toward me coming from respect or from fear and insecurity? That question will tell you everything you need to know about what kind of man you're being. These dynamics are messy. They poke at your deepest insecurities about being wanted, being respected, and being chosen. Maybe you've been the guy who begged and pleaded. Maybe you swung to the other extreme and used silence like a hammer. Either way, don't shame yourself, but don't lie to yourself either. Use this as a mirror. Ask yourself whether your silence comes from self respect or from a desire to dominate. That is the line between a man who quietly rebuilds his life and a man who leaves emotional wreckage behind him. You must choose which side you stand on. And if this hits close to home, if you've ever felt proud of your silence but secretly knew it was a game, or if you've been on the receiving end of that icy wall and kept running back anyway, know this. You're not alone and you are not stuck. Be the man who learns, who grows, who uses his masculine energy to protect, not to punish. Don't just try to attract women. Become the kind of man who doesn't have to chase or manipulate because his peace, his integrity, and his quiet strength do the talking for him long after the conversation ends. 4. Social and cultural pressure to break the silence. Social pressure is a funny thing. It doesn't yell, it whispers. It wraps itself around a woman's mind like background music she didn't choose, but somehow knows all the words to. No relationship exists in a vacuum, and you must understand that every breakup, every moment of silence, gets filtered through an invisible echo chamber of cultural rules, family expectations, and those subtle psychological tricks society has been teaching her since she was young. For generations, women have been groomed, sometimes gently and sometimes fiercely, to be the emotional caretakers of love. They're taught to check in, smooth things over, communicate, manage, fix. That is the script. Meanwhile, men are pushed towards stoicism. Be tough. Be silent. Be strong. So when a man withdraws during conflict, when he becomes the quiet shadow in her story, it doesn't just feel normal, it feels expected. But when silence comes after a breakup, her programming doesn't just hum, it blares like an alarm. Suddenly she feels responsible, not from personal desire, but from decades of reinforced female psychology telling her that she must restore harmony, or she has somehow failed the relationship. That is the trap. That is the pressure. And then, just when she's trying to sit with the quiet, in sweeps the chorus. Her friends, her sister, her mother, her coworkers, all asking the same loaded question, "Have you heard from him?" Don't underestimate how powerful this is. Every question becomes a tiny weight on her chest, each one a reminder that her silence isn't just between her and him anymore. It's on display. These people mean well, but their curiosity creates tension. They amplify her anxiety. They make the quiet feel like a ticking clock she must stop. This is one of the oldest psychology tricks in the book. When enough people repeat the same question, you start believing you owe the world an answer. And now she isn't just thinking about him. She's thinking about her reputation, her image, whether she appears in control or in trouble. Social judgment is real, and it hits harder than anyone admits. Add to that the fear of loneliness, the what now feeling that creeps in at night, and suddenly her silent ex starts looking less like a closed door and more like a familiar hallway she could walk down, even if it's dimly lit. Don't be fooled. This doesn't mean she's convinced he's her soulmate. Sometimes it simply means the unknown feels too big, too cold, too risky. Her mind starts using female psychology shortcuts, loss aversion, cognitive dissonance, emotional nostalgia to rewrite the story. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should reach out. These are the quiet, clever mental edits her brain makes when it wants comfort. This is how the mind teaches itself how to fall in love again with the familiar, even when the familiar wasn't perfect. And remember this: once societal programming, fear of judgment, and her social circle collide, his silence becomes something much bigger than just lack of communication. It becomes a blank canvas. She projects meanings, motives, hopes, fears, everything. That is why the urge to break the silence grows so strong. She's not just fighting emotions, she's fighting narratives. She's fighting the story she's been told about what a good woman does. She's fighting the subtle psychological tricks that say, don't let this fall apart. It's your job to repair it. That pressure builds until the phone in her hand feels like a lifeline and the silence feels like a test she's failing. So when she runs back, when she texts first, when she breaks the quiet you never broke, understand this: she's not simply responding to the man, she's responding to the world around her. Don't mistake her return as pure devotion or perfect certainty. That is not always the case. Sometimes she comes back because culture nudges her. Sometimes she comes back because fear pushes her. Sometimes she comes back because the silence feels heavier on her side of the story. And sometimes she comes back because her mind is wired from childhood to maintain connection at all costs, even when the cost is her own peace. Be aware of this. Be clear-eyed. You must recognize the weight of these external forces because they explain more about her behavior than any romantic fantasy. Don't idealize her return. Don't glorify it. Understand it for what it is: the result of cultural pressure, emotional conditioning, and the quiet but powerful mechanics of female psychology teaching her how to fall in love with what feels safe. That is why many women reach out to the man who stayed silent. Not because silence is magic, but because society taught her that silence is a problem she must solve. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that like button, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights into relationships, mindset, and the psychology behind human behavior. Now here's your affirmation, a reminder of strength, clarity, and emotional independence in a world full of noise and pressure. Comment to remember: I choose peace over pressure. 5. Silence as a weapon in abusive dynamics. Silence can be a tool of strength, a tool of mastery, a tool forged from Old Stoic wisdom, but you must recognize with absolute, unshakable certainty that in abusive dynamic silence is not wisdom, it is a weapon. And any man who uses it to control a woman is not practicing Stoicism when he is practicing domination, and domination is the path of the weak, not the strong, and it shatters the iron mind instead of strengthening it. Don't confuse this behavior with masculinity. Don't mistake emotional chaos for passion. Don't lie to yourself about what you're seeing. In modern life, where stress is high, where relationships move fast, where isolation is common, and where emotional wounds run deep, silence used as punishment hits harder than ever because it creates fear, doubt, and mental fog inside the woman who is desperate for reassurance. The cycle is predictable, recognizable, and universal. Tension builds quietly like a storm gathering strength, then an explosion, an argument, an insult, a cruel outburst, followed by a forced reconciliation controlled entirely by the man who decides when he will speak again. His silence is the leash. His silence is the cage. His silence is the message that says, "You'll come to me on my terms." That is not power. That is not Stoicism. That is not the iron mind you, as a real man, must build. As the great Marcus Aurelius warned, you have power over your mind, not outside events. But an abusive man rejects that lesson entirely. He does not master his mind. He manipulates hers. And that manipulation is powerful because it exploits the most vulnerable human emotions: fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of losing the small moments of affection that feel like oxygen after days of cruelty. She is not running back because she loves him. She is running back because she has been conditioned to believe that his approval is survival. That is the devastating truth. Trauma bonds are real. They form when intermittent cruelty is mixed with unpredictable moments of relief, creating a psychological hook so strong that even intelligent, capable women find themselves unable to break away. Carl Jung said it best: people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And in this dynamic, the woman avoids facing the reality that she is being controlled because the guilt, shame, and confusion have already reshaped her self-perception. She blames herself for his silence. She believes she caused it. She apologizes to end it. That is the prison. That is the cage. That is the psychological chokehold. And the man who uses silence this way knows exactly what he is doing, because he watches her crumble and he enjoys the moment she crawls back for the smallest scrap of attention. Don't overlook the financial aspect either. Many women stay because they feel trapped economically, unable to survive without him. Don't overlook the hope either. The hope that he will go back to the way he was, the hope that the early love bombing was real, the hope that the gentle moments were signs of potential instead of bait. Abusers mix kindness with cruelty because it works. It keeps her attached. It keeps her doubting herself. It keeps her believing every explosion is her fault and every silence is deserved. And if any of this feels familiar, if the highs feel euphoric and the lows feel suffocating, if the arguments are followed by cold silence that makes you feel unsteady, if apologies become the price you pay to restore peace, then you are not witnessing love. You are witnessing manipulation. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't minimize it. Don't explain it away. In this context, the man's silence is not stoic control, it is emotional control, and the desire to return to him is not affection, it is conditioning. The path to true strength, the real, disciplined, unwavering strength of a man with an iron mind, is the exact opposite: to use the silence not as a command, but as a moment of clarity. That is when a woman must plan her escape. That is when she must reach out for help. That is when she must recognize that the dynamic is not a test of love, but a threat to her mental and emotional safety. As Seneca taught, it is not the man who is little, but he who desires more, that is poor, and an abusive man is spiritually bankrupt because he desires control instead of connection. He uses silence not to rise above, but to push another person below. Don't ever let yourself fall into that pattern as a man. Let's make this absolutely clear. Real men do not use silence to dominate. They use it to discipline themselves. Real men do not use silence to erase another person's voice. They use it to sharpen their own judgment. Real men do not use silence to create fear. They use it to create peace. That is Old Stoic wisdom. That is Stoicism win. That is how you forge an iron mind that commands respect, not fear. In today's world, where relationships are fragile, emotions run hot, and people chase instant gratification, the man who commands himself is the man who wins. Don't let manipulation masquerade as masculinity. Don't let toxicity disguise itself as passion. Don't let emotional chaos pretend to be destiny. You must master yourself. You must refuse to participate in emotional warfare. You must stand firm in the principles that separate strong men from weak ones: integrity, clarity, responsibility, restraint. That is your path. That is your command. That is your call to rise and build a version of yourself that no manipulation, no silence, no chaos, no emotional turbulence can ever shake. Victory comes from mastery of self, not control of others. 6. Emotional contagion and empathy. When it comes to relationships, there's a simple truth: silence speaks volumes. And when a man, a high-value man, chooses silence, it creates an intense psychological response, particularly in women. You may have noticed it yourself. When you stay silent, women often feel a pull to come back, even when they can't quite explain why. It's all about emotional contagion and empathy. Silence triggers an emotional reaction, especially when there's an emotional attachment. Women, being naturally empathic, start to overthink your silence, trying to read between the lines. They feel this unspoken tension and begin to wonder, what's he feeling? Why isn't he talking to me? This leads them into a spiral of emotional reflection, where their emotions get amplified, longing, frustration, guilt, all swirling around in their minds. But here's the twist. The very act of silence doesn't necessarily mean you're detached or uninterested. No, the silence may actually be a sign of your masculinity, of your strong, masculine energy that doesn't feel the need to constantly explain yourself. You're a high-value man. You know your worth. You don't have to chase validation or respond to every emotion that comes your way. Women feel this silence as a powerful signal that they can't control or predict, and it triggers an instinct in them to fix things, to restore balance by returning to the source of their emotional turmoil. They may not even fully realize it, but that need to come back is driven by the psychological tension you've created through your deliberate silence. You must understand this dynamic if you want to attract women who respect your worth. A high-value man who is comfortable in his masculinity doesn't need to constantly be on, to be available at every moment. By remaining silent, you set a standard that draws women in, making them wonder what's behind your silence and, more importantly, what they might be missing. Silence is magnetic. It forces the other person to step outside their own comfort zone and work through their emotions. It's as if you're making them come to terms with their own feelings, compelling them to reflect on what they want and need. This is a very powerful tactic, one that speaks directly to the emotional core of the relationship. Now, don't get it twisted. This isn't about playing games or being cold. It's about creating a dynamic of emotional push and pull, where the woman feels the need to bridge the gap and reconnect. It's a subtle form of psychological power, but when you embody it through your high value, masculine energy, the impact is undeniable. You must realize that by withholding your emotions and not over-explaining yourself, you're not just being distant, you're commanding respect. The very act of being silent tells the other person that you are not easily swayed, that you don't need to engage in constant emotional exchanges to feel validated. It's a trait of a high-value man, and women sense that. In fact, women are naturally drawn to this kind of power. The silence doesn't just leave them wondering, it leaves them emotionally vulnerable. They feel the need to return, to fix whatever has been left unresolved. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about making them come back. It's about making them realize your worth without you ever having to say a word. You can build a stronger connection by staying silent than by endlessly chasing after their attention. That is the true mark of a man who commands attention through his masculinity. He doesn't chase, he attracts. So remember, the next time you find yourself in a situation where silence feels like the right move, don't doubt it. Stay silent. Be still. You are creating emotional space for the other person to come to you, to seek your validation. When they return, they do so because they've processed their feelings and now want to come back, not because you've begged them to. You've created a powerful psychological dynamic where you control the emotional tempo. That is what a high-value man does. He doesn't chase after women, but instead attracts them through his own emotional stability and masculine energy. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending this time with me. Listen, everything we talked about today comes down to one simple truth. Your reaction to someone's silence is more important than the silence itself. You deserve clarity, respect, and emotional safety, not confusion or power games. The pull to return is real, but so is your ability to pause, breathe, and choose yourself first. My sincere advice to you is this. When someone goes quiet, don't fill that silence with self-doubt. Fill it with self-respect. Use that space to reconnect with your own values, your peace, and your sense of worth. Because the real victory after any breakup isn't getting them back, it's getting you back. Thank you for watching. Take good care of yourself, stay honest with your heart, and I'll see you in the next video.